Ambien and Rozerem are two medications used to treat insomnia. Ambien is one of the most widely used medicines for insomnia. Rozerem is a bit of a newer drug, so what I'm going to do is explain the differences between these two medications and how they work and what they're designed for. And hopefully you'll get a better understanding of how these two medicines can help people with their sleep problems. Ambien is a GABA receptor agonist. What GABA stands for is gamma-aminobutyric acid. And how Ambien gets its effects is that it activates these receptors, these GABA receptors. And what GABA does is that you have several systems in the body. You have some things that are activating, like glutamate or dopamine or norepinephrine, that when a cell is worked on by one of these neurotransmitters, it causes certain things to happen. Now in the body, there are certain situations where you don't want things to happen. So you have things that are deactivating, and that's what GABA is. So for example, when you're trying to get to sleep, you don't want things being activated. So it uses these particular neurotransmitters to stop certain things from happening, and that's what GABA is. And that's how Ambien works. The effects produced by Ambien are easiest compared to benzodiazepines. Now, Ambien is often advertised as a non-benzodiazepine medication, which is very misleading. It's a non-benzodiazepine in the structural sense. When something is described as a benzodiazepine, they're describing a chemical structure, a structure that all these medications have in similar. But as far as its effects go, it's almost exactly the same. Benzodiazepines also work by being GABA receptor agonists. But the benzodiazepines all, of course, have different side effect profiles, and we're not going to get into that here. But what I mean by it being a little bit misleading is like saying, for example, I've got a door. Now, a door can be unlocked in several different ways. You just need to have a key that opens that door. Now, you can use a regular key to unlock a door, but you could also use something else. Like, for example, at my work, we have a badge that swipes and it opens the door. So now suppose I have a door and I can either use this key or I can use my badge to open the door. They both have the same effect, which is to open the door, but of course they're shaped differently. So it would be misleading to describe the card, in my opinion, as not being a key, because they both open the same door and they have the same effects, and functionally it is a key. Rozerem is a melatonin receptor agonist. It works on M1 and M2 receptors, and M stands for melatonin. Melatonin is a natural hormone produced by the body that has several different functions, but some of those functions include helping with the onset of sleep and the setting of the circadian rhythm. So a lot of people are actually going to be quite familiar with what the onset of melatonin feels like. So a good example of how this medication works is at a certain time of day. Probably many people will be familiar with this. I'm certainly familiar with this. Let's say you get back from work, and often there's a certain window where you'll feel fine, and then all of a sudden you'll feel really, really tired, like you can just put down right away. And that feeling will persist for maybe about an hour or so. It depends on how old you are. And then after that, it just goes away. And maybe for the rest of the night, you feel like, wow, just a couple hours ago I felt like I could have just fallen asleep, and now I feel fine again. What that is the release of natural melatonin, and that has to do with circadian rhythm, and what it does is help with the onset of sleep. So after the melatonin is released, it's released in a large wave, and then over time it diminishes, right? So after it diminishes, that window of opportunity to help go to sleep, it vanishes. So basically, to summarize what this drug does, is it basically reopens that window of opportunity at a later time. So to do a final comparison, Ambien is a true sedative. When someone takes Ambien, it's going to deactivate them, it's going to put them out. Whereas Rozerem, it's not like other sedatives. It mimics a natural hormone, which is melatonin, which helps with the onset of sleep. It makes someone drowsy. So that's probably the best way to compare the two. One is going to sedate someone, one is going to make the other person drowsy. And it's going to make them drowsy in a way where it's going to reopen that window of opportunity, that natural window of opportunity that in today's society, many people are simply just not able to take advantage of it because people don't operate according to the sun anymore. And that's how melatonin operates. It's based on natural light. So people work beyond the hours of the sun, and because of that, it doesn't allow them to take advantage of the natural mechanisms that their body has built to help them get regular and good sleep. And what this does is it just reopens that window of opportunity. As far as side effects go, Rozerem generally has very few side effects. It doesn't have tolerance issues. Ambien, its side effects are essentially in line with most other benzodiazepines. People can feel groggy on them. They just all the normal effects, and it generally has a better side effect profile than benzodiazepines. That's why it is being used over benzodiazepines for quite a long time. Because while it does have benzodiazepine-like effects, the effects are very precise. So benzodiazepines have muscle relaxant effects, they have anti-anxiety effects, they have all sorts of effects, anticonvulsant effects, and what Ambien does is that it has a lot of the hypnotic effects and very few of the other ones. So the amount of medication they have to take to get a hypnotic effect is much lower compared to what other medications would be. So it's generally considered to be a very safe medication. It's hard to overdose on, but it still does have a lot more effects than something like Rozerem would have, but then again, its effects are simply much stronger than another drug. So does that make one better than the other one? Absolutely not. It would be like comparing, let's say, ibuprofen and morphine. Obviously, they're both used to treat the same kind of problem, but one is used for a lot more of a severe situation. The side effects and the effects are much different, but both are used all the time. Sometimes people will take both, but it doesn't make one better than the other. They're just used for the same type of problem, but in different situations. So I hope that was able to give you some insight as to the differences between these two drugs. If you have any other questions, just let me know and I'll be glad to answer those. So I'll see you next time.